This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you're a committed education change agent ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Dr. Carole Basile is the Dean and a professor at Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation, the largest college of education in the nation. Since 2016, she has led efforts to redesign the educator workforce through team-based models that honor learner variance and expand the possibilities of teaching. Before ASU, she served as Dean of the College of Education at the University of Missouri-St. Louis and held faculty and leadership positions at the University of Colorado, Denver, and the University of Houston. Carole is co-author of The Next Education Workforce: How Team-Based Staffing Models Can Support Equity and Improve Learning Outcomes, and has published widely on teacher preparation, systems change, and school community partnerships. With a career that also includes 15 years in business management and organizational development, she brings a rare blend of entrepreneurial spirit and educational vision. Erin O'Reilly at the University of Montana, a previous podcast guest, wrote the following about Carole for this episode. Quote, "Her work in reimagining the teacher workforce is truly inspiring. Through innovative team-based teaching models, she and her team are not only transforming how schools operate, but also reshaping the future of education. As a teacher, educator, and researcher, I've been deeply influenced by her vision and dedication. Witnessing the tangible impact on teacher retention and job satisfaction has given me renewed hope and affirmation in my own work, designing systems and curriculum to better support aspiring educators." End quote. So listeners, let's get to know Carole before we dive into the deep end of education, teaching in teams, and teacher training pathways. We start with music. Carole has been listening to a history of rock in 500 songs. It's not just about riffs or hit singles. It's about rock as a cultural movement full of experimentation, disruption, and variance. When she listens, is she a fan, a learner, a dean leading one of the largest colleges of education in the country? Likely all of the above. Then we rewind to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where school came easily, but wasn't especially engaging. Her entrepreneurial father shaped her worldview, teaching her to manage people well and stay open to ideas. His influence still guides her leadership. Carole's career is anything but conventional. Student teaching in Philadelphia, a master's in counseling, 15 years in business, then a doctorate that brought her back to education. Along the way, a boss once told her being interested in, quote, a lot of things was a flaw, but David Epstein's range would disagree, and Carole's life proves it. We'll talk about that. From there, we'll talk about variance, not just as a math term or biblical one, but as a philosophy of education. Every learner moves at their own pace, in their own way. ASU's Next Education Workforce is putting that into practice, moving beyond the, quote, one teacher, one classroom model to teams of educators who bring diverse strengths. We'll also touch on ideas like loon shots and possibility thinking and ask Carole to paint a picture of what team-based classrooms feel like for students, teachers, and families. We'll close with a shout out to those upon whose shoulders she stands. So buckle up. From Jefferson Airplane to Jefferson County, from Harrisburg to Arizona, this conversation is about rock and roll, variance, teaching in teams, and the future of education itself. And now, here's my conversation with Carole Basile. Carole, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
So listeners, let's get to know Carole first before we dive into the deep end of the pool that is education, teaching in teams, teacher training pathways, and the like. So Carole, I want to start not with education, but with music. You shared with me that you've been listening to this amazing podcast, The History of Rock in 500 Songs. So I did a bit of research about the show, and I listened to the episode about Jefferson Airplane's infamous song, White Rabbit. I was really struck by how the show tells the story of rock, not just as a musical genre, but as a cultural movement full of experimentation, disruption, and variance. So I'm curious, when you listen, are you listening as a fan, as a learner, as a leader of a college of education, or likely all of the above? And you called the podcast addictive. You said that to me. I totally agree. So how so? How is it addictive?
You know, I have to always start my life with this story about a boss who said to me one time, "Are you somebody who likes to know a lot about one thing or a little about a lot of things?" And I'm definitely the latter. And he told me, by the way, that that was my character flaw.
Yeah.
But it turns out that and everything that I've done, right? Like it's just I don't know. I just have this like intellectual curiosity about things. And that has been a thing. I have two brothers that are very into music more than I am. And it's just been, I don't know, it has just been fascinating to listen to this guy spin these stories, add all this cultural background, understanding who these people are as humans and musicians and all the connections between them. And it's just fascinating, right, to listen to it. And it is like this little bit of everything that you garner from this show. And it is addictive. Once you start, you want to keep hearing the next story.
You know, one of the things that I was really struck by, and in fact, I listened to a couple of other episodes besides White Rabbit, which is, you know, that song is something I listened to when I was growing up. But what struck me was that even if you don't know the song, or maybe even never have heard of the group, you get pulled in to the story. And I'm still trying to figure out, Carole, why? Why do you get pulled into this sort of, and it's almost like he's reciting, this is what happened and this is what happened, but there's something about it that's just quite remarkable.
Yeah, and he intertwines all the other music, right, in the story. He's just an amazing storyteller. And I think that's what educators are at the end of the day. I think they have to be amazing storytellers, and there's something about how it connects to humans and human emotion and thought that I think he just somehow has figured out how to make that work.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, listening to the episode on White Rabbit, it's now given me a new appreciation for Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, well, and you should go back to the beginning.
I know. I should just start from the beginning.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It might take me several years. I know it's probably taking you a while as well. So, yeah. So, Carole, you said school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania came easily, but wasn't especially engaging, and that it was really your entrepreneurial father who shaped you the most, teaching you about managing people, treating them well, staying open to ideas, and always thinking ahead to the next thing. So if I were to shadow a day in the life of your dad back then, what kind of things would I see or hear that left such a mark on you? And I wonder, in what ways did his values become your values?
Well, I think, it's interesting. He bought a business in, 1964, 65. I can't really remember exactly what year. And this was a surgical supply business. And so he was selling to doctors. He was a very good salesperson, but he knew how to hire people. He knew just how to connect with people. If you went to lunch with him, he would be the last one out of the restaurant. We would be sitting in the car waiting because he would be talking to the hostess or the waitress or the owner of the restaurant or whatever. And he would come back and you would know their whole life story. It was never about him. It was about them. And he just was always interested in people. He later in his life read a lot of books, a lot of biographies. He was interested in how people survived, right? Basic, human conditions during the wars and all kinds of things. He just was always very interested in people. And I think because of that, I think within his, as he thought about his business and what came next and what came next and what came next, and how he grew that business over about 25 years, it was always about what people needed, right? It was always about the human condition as much as it was about growing a business. But it was about how could how could you do the next thing, right, to help people? And it was that kind of business. And I think that in and of itself, right, was sort of foretold, right? Sort of how I think about things, because we're always thinking about, particularly in education, we're always thinking about what's next and thinking about, we talk about the learner experience, the educator experience. That all came from that foregrounding, I think, of watching him navigate people all the time.
So I wonder, Carole, we're going to get into the education end of the pool, the deep end of the pool, a little bit later in this conversation. But I wonder if your father, even if the words were not there to describe it, as he was going through the hiring process and also getting to know people and all of that, that he was thinking along the lines of what it means to be in a team. Because essentially, if you're hiring people into a business, you're building a team.
Yeah.
And I wonder if do you think he was thinking about that in those terms?
Oh, I totally think he was.
Hmm.
I think it was always about who can we add, who can we bring in, never thinking he always had the expertise. He was always looking for who could come in, be part, we talk about teams with distributed expertise.
Yeah.
And I think, when I think about the people in that business over time, and the way he would talk about people and the way that he would, allow people to have autonomy to do what they wanted to do, what they could do, to bring the expertise in, but to take it and run with it. I think that was always important to him. He was always thinking then about how do you give people, right, people who are there, more expertise, more opportunity, so that they could contribute to that team. And it started as a very small team and then grew to 100 people or 120 people, something like that. But over time, I could always see him and who he was hiring. He was always thinking about that idea, not just of the team, but of how do you distribute expertise and that you don't have to be the smartest one in the room all the time.
Wow, Carole, that's so cool. I'm going to share this for our listeners here today. Yesterday, well, actually, over the last few days, What School Could Be has added a new team member. Her name is Leon Kittle, and she's the former executive director of sustainability initiatives for the Denver Public Schools. And she's come on board to our team as strategic direction and, org sustainability. And when you talk about the variances in the team, that distributed kind of expertise. Yesterday, she presented a slide deck for, about her plan of getting ready to set us up for a strategic plan that moves us into the future. And I had goosebumps through the whole thing because I could actually see that distributed expertise in motion, right? I mean, she comes as a business person, not necessarily as an educator, onto the team, and that's where her strengths are. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what that distributed expertise means.
Well, I mean, I don't come out of education either, right? I
Yeah.
started life, right, doing a number of different things, and so I always worked on teams, right? We had sales teams, we had, with teams of architects, designers, things like that. When I worked for the design firm, we taught like team building when I worked for Amico, and we were doing, organizational development and training and things like that, right? We always talked about teams and how you had to be able to share expertise and you had to be able to lean on each other.
Yeah.
And so that idea, right, that people have to be sort of a matrix organization, that it's not linear. It never can be linear. Organization charts are really false. They're like a false narrative for an organization because
Right.
it just can't function that way. But I think at the heart of all of this is that idea that the team, right, can then move us more strategically. And as we're trying to not think about strategic planning, but to think about possibility thinking, then you bring, you have this group of experts who actually help you to think about the possibilities. And then you add AI to that, and then you're really, then you really take off. And so, those are things that we're thinking about too, as we think about how do you actually allow teams to do the kinds of things teams can do, right, that are human.
Right.
And then how do you also think about, AI and all of that and, all of those kinds of things that then add to, but ultimately help you to be able to move quickly.
I've actually been having quite a few conversations over, last 2 years with tech folks here in my home state of Hawaii about the idea of AI as one of your team members.
Yeah.
And I wonder what's the extent of your thinking about that at this point?
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's going to be essential. You can't get away from it and you can't be afraid of it.
Right.
But what AI does is, we as a team can sit in a room. We only know what we know. We only bring the experience that we bring and the expertise that we bring. And the minute that you allow AI to come in a way where you are really thinking deeply about what kind of questions do you want to ask? What kinds of questions do you have? How do you use it as a place of inquiry? To be able to help you to think about the possibilities. And it isn't one time and it isn't a strategic plan. You go, oh, okay, we're going to do a 5-year strategic plan. You can't do that anymore.
Right.
Because things happen so quickly. And you need AI to keep helping you to think about what are the trends, what are the events, what's out there, what do I not know about, what does the team not know about. So it will be an integral part, I think, of any kind of team.
So, Carole, I actually want to come back to that story that you opened with about the person who said it was a flaw, if you will, that you think a little about a lot of things instead of going deep in one thing. And, you obviously, as you've already shared, you answered the latter. And he called it a character flaw. And frankly, shame on him, Carole, if I could just say publicly here.
He's no longer a living, so it's okay.
Okay, all right. So he won't hear that. But
He won't
I wanted
hear
to come back to it because over the last 2.5 years of doing this show, I've had so many conversations with guests about David Epstein's book, Range, which argues that in a complex world, it's often the generalists and not the specialists who really thrive. So as you shared that story about your former boss and why you thought he was wrong, and in fact, the evidence, is quite clear that he was wrong in terms of, your life.
Me.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, me.
I wonder if you can go a little bit deeper about this idea of generalist versus specialist, not necessarily in your life, but sort of your life writ large and all of the work that you've done in your resume and your leadership and all of that. How's that idea sort of played out? And as you look down from above, where are we as a culture in terms of this sort of tension between generalism and specialists?
It's a good question, Josh. I think there's a need for both, right? I don't want to say, oh, he was wrong because there's no need for that or nobody should be specialists. Clearly, people should be specialists. I want my
Yes.
doctors to be specialists. I want,
Yeah.
I want scientists to be I want people who are specialists in things. And I think that's really important. I think, it's always about balance. It's always about nothing to extremes. But I do think that actually what is missing more than anything is that there's a lack of intellectual curiosity, and that I don't see people asking enough questions or wanting to move out of their bubble, right, enough to
Mm.
really think about what's out there and what's happening and read something different or read something that comes out of business or comes out of education, right, if you're a business person or
Yeah.
any of those kinds of things. And there is this lack of intellectual curiosity, and I worry about more than whether or not somebody's a specialist or a generalist.
Mm.
But I always think that there should be some part, right, some balance, right, to the generalist that should be looking at things that specialists do and things that what generalists do, right, that specialists should be looking at more than, because I think it would inform them in different ways.
Mm.
And so for me, it is a question of, are people intellectually curious?
Right. I think when I read Epstein's Range a few years ago, one of the things that really jumped out at me is the idea of thriving. And that what he noted was, yes, absolutely, we need those specialists. I don't want to be in surgery or having surgery done on me by somebody who isn't a specialist. That's a little bit cliche. But the ideas that Epstein writes about is the diminishing returns. When you're a specialist and you're, doing your thing over and over and over again, inevitably there is this point of diminishing returns, and that people who are generalists actually tend to move through those moments more easily because they have that intellectual curiosity and something else that's helps them to get through that. I wonder what you think about that.
I think it's interesting. I think there's something to missing things too, right? I think on both sides, right, that you have to be very, very careful that when you're a generalist, that you also aren't missing some nuance about something. But when you're a specialist, you also have to be careful that you're not so inch wide, mile deep that you also are missing something, right? That there's some totally different answer for what's happening that you can't see because you're so far down that path.
Right. So, Carole, I want to come at this from one more direction, but it's personal for me. I taught history in high school for 17 years, and there was always this debate. Do you teach with the post-hole approach, digging deeply into, for example, one year or one event like World War I? That's all you spend your time on. Or do you take the long chronological sweep, which some folks denigrate as a mile wide and an inch deep? So listening to your story and what you've been saying about generalism versus specialists, I wonder if leadership in education experiences the same tension. Like, do you see yourself as more of a post-hole leader, diving deep into one issue at a time, or more of a kind of chronological leader, drawing patterns and, I don't know, lessons across the long arc, if you will?
Can the answer be neither?
Okay.
Let me go back to your history example because it's
Yeah.
interesting, right? You will never be able to teach kids all of history.
No, correct.
And so then you say, all right, if what I think is right, these are my only two paths. The question is there another path? Is there a path, right, that says allow people to follow their interests and their passions, let it take them where they want to go,
Yeah.
and what they learn. And what they bring back, they bring back. But do it in a way so that it gets back to the history of rock, but do it in a way where they have to cover, right, so many different angles. And there are people here, for example, who there was a woman here. She recently left. She went to Berkeley, Lindy Elkins-Tanton. Lindy is literally a rocket scientist, but she had been leading a course here and other work in high schools and things like that, where she and three other professors, all coming from different disciplines, would put a big question up on the board and say, okay, go, what questions does this, does this spawn, right, for you? And students would create these lists of questions. Then they would go out, they'd research these questions, they would come back, and they would create a new list of questions. And they would do this, right, iteration after iteration, because it wasn't about the content. It was about the questions they were asking. And so they didn't have to do it chronologically. They didn't have to go deep in one particular thing and stay within a question, because that question and that research and that reading took them to all kinds of different places and different areas and different content. And yet everything they were doing was to answer this really, really big question. And so there's something about leadership, to come back to your leadership question, which is to allow people, right, to be able to explore things in their own way, making sure that you always have this sort of big picture, big direction, right, on the, at the head of things. We talk here a lot about Michael Crow, president of the university, right? He never starts anything. There's nothing you will go to where he does not start with the charter of the university. And we now have, as a college, right, we have things that we talk about all the time. But that doesn't mean that people can't go down their own path to say, okay, now to get there, how do I, I got to learn about this. I've got to go to this meeting. I've got to learn, I've got to think about things. And so you're really driving this intellectual curiosity of people as a leader in order to bring things in to build what it is you want to really build and see where it can go, because you don't know everything either.
So if I can draw a comparison, I just celebrated the 150th episode where, in a bit of a role reversal, my daughter interviewed me, which was super fun. And one of the things that I've noticed, Carole, over the 5 years that I've been doing this show are these, it's so funny, we come back to White Rabbit, there are these rabbit hole moments. And they happen almost with every single guest, where I'll be kind of cruising along, getting to know them, looking at their resume, taking everything from the intake form. And then all of a sudden something will come up and I'll just fall down this hole. And sometimes I don't emerge for a long time. And I'm wondering then, so your thoughts about that, but also I'm really curious, back to Michael Crow, that it feels as if there's a bit of a breadcrumb trail or a line that's attached to your waist that keeps bringing you back to the quote unquote charter, the work that you're doing. So you go down the hole and then, but you can come back out again and realize that you're still continuing on. Does that make sense? It's like you're still grounded.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that totally makes sense. But that's the job of the leader, right? The leader has to hold the vision
Yeah.
that brings everybody back, right? So you can let them go, but it has to come back because they have to be anchored in something.
Right.
In some vision, right? And that's the hardest part of the leader is having the vision and keeping a vision, being able to see what's coming, what's next. That's why strategic planning for me never works.
Right. Right. Because you get tied to something too tightly. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, amazing. Okay. Hey, everyone. We've been talking with Carole Basile, Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Greg Bear, along with Ryan Rudzeski, and we're the co-hosts of the Remaking Tomorrow podcast,
a series of conversations about the future of learning.
We encourage you to find and listen to the Remaking Tomorrow podcast wherever you listen to your pods.
You'll find over 60 past episodes that you can browse and listen to whenever you'd like.
Remaking Tomorrow is powered by Remake Learning. Learn more at remakelearning.org.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my 2 podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What I find that I value most from leadership experiences is being able to work with a variety of different people.
At Inspire Citizens, we support schools with whole school global citizenship education. Hear stories of this work directly from students on our Empathy to Impact podcast.
When you do something good, you feel good inside as well. You're helping people. You're making a change.
How might students transform your community today? Find out by listening to the Empathy to Impact podcast.
Hey everyone, we are back with Carole Basile. Okay, as a way to dive into the deep end of the pool in education, you shared that your children and grandchild teach you every day about that theme of variance. You will think I'm insane, Carole, but I spent a significant, speaking of, rabbit holes, a significant amount of time studying the mathematical, spiritual, even biblical meanings of the word variance, which was fascinating. So what does variance mean to you? In what ways do you value variance? And how does the day in and day out of your family life help you to understand the word's significance?
Oh my goodness. Now we will go down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
So, a personal note.
Okay.
I have 2 children. Both of my children were adopted from Russia. One is doing extraordinarily well. Went to ASU, living in Seattle, doing great work in the military, all the things, married.
Yeah.
Doing great. Smart kid, plays soccer, he just does all the things you would hope your kid would do. The other one, unfortunately, is doing just as poorly. Schizophrenia, no medication has ever worked for him. He's living on the street. It has been an unbelievable slog to try to help him and to find ways to just give him any kind of joy in life. Extraordinarily difficult. That's variance. So when we start to look at all of the kids, right, that are out there, all the people that are out there in our schools, and we think about all of the different things that are happening to them, their experiences, what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they, all the things that have happened to them, things that are impacting them, physical health, mental health, families, all the social things, right, that happen. We cannot continue to build education systems. We can't continue to think that every single one of them is the same, going to be on the same page at the same time in the same way, or that they're going to learn at the same time in the same way, or that they're going to be able to, go through a K-12 system that is a lockstep system, and that nothing is ever going to happen. Right. That their life is just going to be this perfect life. They're going to go through, school perfectly and come out at the other end in exactly 12 years from, August to May.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense to think that we should be building a system like that. And yet that's what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at my own two children, right, just the difference between the two, the needs of the two, what the needs were as they were going through school, different kinds of things. And I don't want to say that the first one is perfect. He had his issues. We had to build, we had to build teams of people differently, right, around each of them. We have to do that for every kid because of that kind of variance.
Wow. I have 5 brothers. Actually, I just lost one recently to cancer. And now I'm thinking, Carole, about how wildly different the 6 boys are. Plus, I have a sister who's the oldest. And that in some way, shape, or form, that concept of variance is a way to understand differences, but it's also a way to realize that there's the concept of family. Mm-hmm. That you can have a family, but you have variances within the family, and that somehow or other both exist at the same time and both are good. Mm-hmm. See where I'm going with that? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
It's interesting. I worked with a group of people years ago from Indonesia. And in Indonesia, there's 400 and some odd languages that are spoken,
right?
Different cultures, all kinds of things. And they said to me one time that they had a real problem with the research that we did in this country because we're always looking for differences. Yeah. Always looking, right? Whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, whatever it is, we're always looking for differences. In their research, they're always looking for similarities.
Wow. Interesting.
And that is really telling too. And so, this idea that that you can have variance and yet, right, you also can look for similarities, I think is also really telling as we think about all of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so Carole, let's do a quick lightning round on your co-authored book, The Next Education Workforce. So these are short prompts and brief responses, okay? Mm-hmm. So there's actually 4 of them. So number 1, paint us a picture for someone who has only ever known the one teacher, one classroom model. What does a team-based classroom look and feel like on a given day for teachers, for students, for families?
So instead of saying, here's 100 kids, and here's your 25, and you're 25, and you're 25, and you're 25, and you have to be all things to all kids at all times, all of the 25. Now we're saying, what if we took all of those 100 kids and those 4 teachers, plus others, built a team, and we started thinking about things like dynamic grouping. We thought about how schedules change. We could think about how we actually teach inquiry-based learning and learning, in the ways that we have talked about for many, many years. And so it just totally changes the way that the entire experience looks, both for the learner and for the educator.
So corollary or follow-up, does the energy change? Like when I talk about what it looks like, I can see what it looks like, but what does it feel like when that happens?
I think it's much more dynamic. I think you see kids that are moving. I think you see educators that are actually happy and smiling and talking to each other and trying to figure things out. You're seeing kids that are working together, that are thinking together, that aren't getting as frustrated, that aren't struggling as much, that are getting through the day. I think that everybody's kind of getting through the day in a better and more joyful way.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So, number 2, future focus. You describe schools of the future as more like hospitals or law firms, teams of professionals with distributed expertise. And so, fast forward 2 to 5 years, Carole, what would we actually see happening differently in one of these schools as they take on this new sort of dynamic?
Well, I think it is what we are beginning to see. This is nascent work. We're in a couple hundred schools right now doing this work. But it is schools that are where there are two things that are present. So the best schools right now, there are two things that are present. One is educators have autonomy. They have much more room to be able to now think about the needs of individual kids. So how to deepen knowledge, but also how to personalize knowledge, back to your general versus specific.
Yeah.
But there's also accountability, right? So those two things, teacher autonomy and accountability, are in play here.
Hmm.
And I think that's what we're talking about in terms of educators being able to work together to be able to serve the kids, right? The multitude of kids, and in different ways and in different small groups and different kinds of instructional strategies. And then you put AI, right, into that mix.
Right.
We are beginning to see, right, these 2-hour-a-day schools where kids are getting core content so that the educators, right, the job of an educator then it starts to change the job, that job, and what a teacher does and how we envision that teacher standing in front of a classroom, right? All that begins to change.
Right. Right. Okay, so that's a perfect segue then to number 3, which is about teacher retention. So you argue team-based models don't just benefit students, they also keep teachers in the profession. So can you share maybe a story or two of how working in teams has changed what's possible for educators?
So there's a educator that tells a story about how her best year of teaching was the year she had cancer. She had been teaching for 32 years. She was ready to give it up. She was done. Program after program after program had come in. She never saw any growth with these kids. And she said, look, I'm done. And she resisted working in a team until the rest of her team said, okay, really, we're going to do this. And you ought to be part of this. And now she wouldn't do anything differently. And now she's been teaching for 36 years. And she had cancer. And in the past, right, the school district would have had to hire a long-term sub. She would have had to leave. She would have been isolated dealing with cancer. But because she had a team, none of that had to happen.
Right.
Kids didn't have to deal with the transition of a teacher. They could see her. They knew what was happening with her. And she could continue to work and be busy and work with her team and come in when she could and Zoom in when she could and take off when she needed to. The whole dynamic changes when you have people you can lean on.
So follow up, maybe it sounds obvious, but if I were a teacher in a dynamic like that, my approach each day would feel quite different. Is that a fair way of looking at it? Because I've had my share. I think my entire career was mostly solo teacher, but the very best moment of my career, very best moment of 17 years teaching history was when I team taught with a colleague. That was an amazing year.
Yeah. So, during COVID, we always said that, two things. Nobody wants to be isolated and everybody wants flexibility.
Right.
Teaching is both isolating and inflexible.
Yeah.
And so what this is doing is it's giving educators, right, that opportunity to have flexibility not only in their teaching, but in their lives.
Yeah.
They can go to the bathroom. They can go to a kid's performance. They can get to a doctor's appointment. They can, they can do things without having to worry about a sub, without, they can go for an hour and come back, right, and do what they need to do. And they're not isolated anymore. They're not sitting there trying to figure out how to serve every single one of those kids by themselves.
Right.
And you can't, which is just, it's impossible. The job is not humanly possible.
Right. Okay, last one in this lightning round, number 4. This is a policy moment. Last week, Carole, Dr. Glenn Maleko was selected to be Michigan's next state superintendent. And What School Could Be is doing a lot of work in Michigan, so that's why we're super aware of this. If you were sitting across from him tomorrow, what's the one shift from your book you'd want him to treat as urgent and act on first?
Well, we are also doing a lot of work in Michigan right now. And so, what I would love for him to do is to go visit schools that are doing this work and go talk to people. Because seeing is believing.
And what do you think would ultimately be that first move?
And then he needs to give permission for people to do it. It's all about permission giving. Not a policy move necessarily, right? Okay, incentive. Be great if there were some dollars and there was some incentive, of course.
Yeah.
But if the state chiefs can simply give a nod, a signal, can give a nod, can give permission and say, look, go do this, right? Let's figure out, if there's things getting in the way, if there's barriers, if there's policy getting in the way, then let's figure out how to move those things aside so we can actually do this.
Right.
And that's what they need to do. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take a policy change. It takes somebody giving permission to give teachers autonomy while maintaining accountability to get this thing moving and to make these changes.
If I can just share a quick story about this then. So as I mentioned, the greatest moment for me teaching was this moment when I team taught with a colleague. And I'm realizing that in that moment, his name is Russell. Russell and I started talking about this idea of putting our classes together. Then the next step, Carole, was we gave ourselves permission to think about it and keep thinking about it and possibly act on it. And then at the same time, we also made sure that admin was okay with us thinking about it and possibly acting on it. And then once we did it, it was actually as simple as making a decision that his 15 kids and my 15 kids in our 2 classrooms would all come into one classroom together. And then we would organize them into, 10 teams.
Yeah.
And this was a really amazing moment for me, Carole, because this is when the iPad showed up. And the school had 10 of them. This is a big independent school. They had 10 iPads. So we got a hold of them. And basically each team got one iPad. And that gave them a window to the world at that point.
Yeah.
So what you're saying then is that really is as simple as getting that conversation going and then figuring out how you rearrange yourself.
Yeah. It's exactly what you did. It's just what we need to do.
Wow.
It's just making up your mind. You want to do this. You want to make it work. And then you find out, right, that, oh my gosh, look at all the things I can do now that I wasn't able to do before. But I always knew these were the right things to do.
Right. Right. But I'm still being really wide-eyed about this, Carole, because ultimately we both went back to our solo classrooms. The forces that pull you back are pretty strong.
No question.
No question. Okay. All right.
No question. Because leadership, the problem is, right, it's having consistent leadership.
Right.
It all gets back to leadership at the end, Josh.
Yeah, and also for Russell and I, at the end of the year, it was the final exam that mattered more than anything. And so it was his students versus my students and, where they landed on the curve, which, of course, is what pulls you back. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I could comment on that too. But that's going to change today. I think that's going to change. I think with AI, I think it's not going to be about outputs. It's going to be about inputs. I think we're going to be able to see a broader set of assessments and really like what actually happened and how kids were thinking and how you were getting them to think together that you could not have done by yourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Not about the answers. It's about the inputs. It's about, were they thinking more critically? Were they able to problem solve more? Were they able to communicate better? Were they like all of those things?
Yeah.
That AI is going to be a game changer around that.
Awesome. Okay, so Carole, while prepping for this conversation, you taught me a new word. And the word is loonshot, as Safi Bacall defines it. It's a radical idea that seems strange, impractical, or even crazy at first, but if nurtured, can change the world. So loonshots often fail early or get dismissed because they don't fit existing systems. And we've kind of been talking about that already. So yet history shows they become breakthroughs when given the space to grow. So the key isn't luck or genius, but building structures that protect fragile ideas long enough for their true value to emerge. So you've made teaching in teams a central theme at the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation, where you are dean. To some, it seems obvious. To others, it may feel disruptive, even impossible in traditional systems. So do you see teaching in teams as a loonshot in education? And if so, what does it take to build the structures that protect this idea and grow it long enough for its true value to emerge?
It is a loon shot in some ways, but it's not first generation loon shot, right? Like this was a thing in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And it didn't stick. Accountability measures came in, no child left behind, right? Like just as you say, the assessment systems really, really tanked it in some ways. And I think, so this is sort of the next iteration of it. And, and now we think with technology and we think, we're in a different time and we're different, certainly a different space and a different set of needs. But I don't know. Are there enough people, right? Are there enough state superintendents? Are there enough superintendents? Are there enough, schools, charter schools? I don't care what kind of school, private school. Are there enough, right? People that can see this vision, can see what can happen,
right? That
this can actually take hold. And then, can you get the federal government to signal that this is a good thing? Can we get, there's all the players, right, have to start really talking about this and, for it to really be something I think that catches on and that's able to stick. I don't know. I don't know. And we're at a, you always feel like your life, right? You're at some kind of juncture here, but
yeah,
we kind of are.
So maybe you don't know, but are you optimistic?
I'm generally optimistic. Yes. I tend to be an optimist, but I don't know. I really don't know. And there are some days when I go, oh my gosh, this is going to take off, right? We've had over 2,000 people come visit, right, to see schools. Like there's interest. There's a lot of interest in it.
Right.
Whether or not people will actually do it, whether or not it will sustain, whether or not leader after leader, principal after principal, when we see principals that leave every few years, superintendents that change every few years.
Yeah.
I don't know, Josh. It all comes back to leadership and permission and people who get it. And we can speak to a room and half the people will get it and half the people won't.
Yeah.
And they will have to hear it 3 or 4 times or they'll have to come see it it's very difficult for people to think about education in any other way than what they went to school because they were all successful at it.
Right.
So how can it be bad?
Right.
But as we start to think about, there's going to be a move, right? If there's a move here to privatize schools, if there's a move to, really think differently, what AI is going to do, I think it's going to shift everything. And I think the structures are going to have to change. They're going to have to bend.
Right. Okay. So Carole, one more question before we go to our second break. And it's kind of along the same lines. A book you are reading titled Possibility Thinking by Ron Bagetto, I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yes.
Talks about possibility thinking as a practice of embracing what doesn't yet exist, but could, meaning inviting uncertainty not as a bug, but as a creative driver. So in classrooms that this idea shows up as, quote, lesson unplanning or designing legacy challenges, real problems that students contribute to in a very meaningful way. And so at Arizona State, you've built teams, roles, and programs that do something similar, seeing learner variance not as friction, but as fuel. So how does possibility thinking shape your vision for teaching in teams? And what would possibility thinking or a possibility thinking classroom look like in practice under your models?
So with all transparency, Ron Bagetto is a faculty member of ours.
Mm-hmm.
Ron has been building a number of AI bots, right? Thinking about possibility thinking. How does AI support this idea of possibility thinking? And I think it goes back, Josh, to what you were talking about, where you're talking about, do you go chronologically or do you go deep in one area?
Yeah.
And I think when you start building classrooms around possibility thinking, now you have this opportunity to really get kids to think very differently about what the future can look like, based on the past, right? Or at least informed by the past. because it's important. It's important to know, but also where things are going and how things are going and what is possible, right? And how does AI help to inform, young learners, right, about what actually is going on, in the world. And it's interesting. We got Michael Crow sent, I think, yesterday in 1955, right? All these ideas around AI were just forming.
Yeah.
And he talks about this project, and it's really interesting. Like, if the kids didn't even know that because it's not in your books. But now AI could tell you that, all right, these are the kinds of things, right, that people are learning and they're discovering. And, everybody thinks the COVID vaccine happened overnight. Well, of course it didn't happen overnight. It happened over a period of years. But this idea, right, of possibility thinking then really, really helps the learner, I think, to start diving into what is possible.
This is a really cool variation, Carole. I did an episode with the founder of a school in Cambodia called Liger Leadership Academy. And it took kids from very rural, very poor communities and pulled them together. And what emerged in my prep and in the conversation that I had with him was something called opportunity-based learning. And I see opportunity-based learning and possibility thinking as kind of running parallel to each other, because it's always kind of taking you outside of the box that we tend to put people in, and it gives you these rabbit hole opportunities to follow your curiosity. And am I on the right track here?
No, I think that's right. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I have to listen to that one.
Yeah, and what was really special about that is that the kids then had the opportunity in opportunity-based learning to really make a difference in their communities. I remember this one story he told me where the kids decided that they wanted to write the book on Cambodian economics. And so that was the project that they took on for themselves. And they ended up writing that book, and then the Cambodian government adopted it as its book on Cambodian economics. And
That's great. That's great.
That's variance at its very highest level, isn't it?
That's great. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, to take, you start with possibility thinking. Well, then that creates opportunities. Then, learners start to say, oh, well, there's an opportunity. This is a place I can go. This is, because all we hear, right, especially around career and all these kinds of things, oh, these jobs are going to end and this is going to happen, this isn't, you're not going to be able to do this anymore and blah, blah, blah. It's really a negative spin, right, on jobs and careers and what am I going to do and how am I going to do it?
Yeah.
But what you're saying, right, is that if we can get kids to start looking at possibilities and seeing possibilities as opportunities, that's a game changer.
Right. And if you marry that together with teaching in teams and the dynamic that you've been describing over the last 47 minutes.
Distributed expertise.
Holy smokes, that just get my heart is up. It's beating, at this point.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so hey everyone, we've been talking with Carole Basile, Dean at the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary. And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Ever made a tough decision and looked back and wondered, what did I miss? What happened? What could I have done differently? I'm Peter Stievelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. After nearly 30 years in education, I know that real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about learning from mistakes, embracing growth, and lifting each other up. Join me each week as I talk with leaders who reflect on their challenges, their relationships, and the lessons that made them stronger. Because imperfection, that's where the real learning happens. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey everyone, we are back with Carole Basile. So, Carole, your philosophy of education can be summed up in 3 words: engage, engage, engage. But you've also said that the real heart of it is to honor variance, as we've been talking about. So you used to ask your kids if they'd rather read about something in a book, watch a video, or go there. And they always chose to go there. And you even wrote a book, The Good Little School, about a school in Jefferson County that embodied this spirit. So let's go deep here on this idea. When you talk about honoring variance, what does that mean to you? I mean, really the honoring part. Why does variance emotionally almost matter so much to you? And what would our listeners hear or see in a classroom that truly honors that engage, engage, engage ethos?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the guy that started that school, when he was asked to describe the school, he said 8 vans. He didn't envision it to be a classroom. He envisioned kids traveling and doing things and moving and, always experiencing, right? Very, as you think about the ultimate, experiential schools,
right?
Not easy to do, not inexpensive, not, all those things. But I do think that that's that opportunity, right? That we're giving kids, right, to not only learn what they need to learn. Kids, there's a certain amount of content, right, that kids need to learn, but there's also the learning to learn piece of that. And then there's how do you engage? I mean, we were just talking about, possibility thinking, opportunity thinking, how do they work in teams? All of those things that allow these humans, right, to go down the kinds of paths they want to go down. And at some point, right, it doesn't matter what they're learning, but that they're learning and they're engaged and they want to come back every day and they're showing up. And I think that's what you're looking for, right? And that they're able to do it sometimes in their own time. And we had kids, we met with a high school group one time. And one of the things that was so fascinating to me, and one of the ideas they had was to get rid of lunch.
Wow.
Because they end up spending lunch just going around trying to find teachers to help them with the work that they need to get help with, and they don't eat.
Right.
And so their idea was, could we just have people, have carts? Could we just have carts out there, right? So where we can just grab an apple, grab a sandwich, grab a bag of chips, grab whatever, right? And just be able to eat and learn at the same time. And then get rid of lunch, and then you could actually change the schedules, and it would change everything. Right. And then kids could spend more time, right, in math when they needed more time, so all of these things, like the structural change, that's really, really important to all of this, that you would see, I think, in a learning environment. I don't want to call it a classroom, I don't want to call it a school, but in a learning environment.
Right.
All of that dynamic would start to change if kids were really, really engaged in ways that they want to be engaged in, and that we're actually using their time in effective ways.
Wow, Carole, I was just thinking that after I left teaching, I spent 10 years working retail at our big flagship Apple store here in Honolulu. And then the pandemic happened. Of course, mostly the stores closed for a while. And that was my first taste of, coming back home again. And then as I began my position as executive director of What School Could Be, and I'm working remotely at home, the whole structure of my life changed as a result of the variances that can actually happen when you're not moving on someone else's schedule. In other words, lunch has become quite a variable thing for me. Maybe one day it is grabbing an apple. Maybe one day it's actually sitting down at 11 instead of 1. To eat lunch. It's such a trip how you gain kind of control of your life, when that dynamic is in play.
Yeah. You think about how people shop today, and you go into Walmart, for example, Target, wherever. And what's so interesting is that people are shopping and they're on their phones at the same time, because you're looking things up, right? You're trying to figure out, is this the best deal? Is this the best product? Is this what do I really want? Is this the right size? Is this people are actually learning today as they're shopping.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more opportunity to start to do, to compare and to think and to, it's really interesting, right? To think about learning, right, in this bigger, broader way. And what if learning environments, right, for kids were kind of like a store where you need certain essential things all the time. You need bread, you need milk, you need, whatever.
Right.
You need math, you need to learn to read. But there's like this whole big store, right, of things to explore and to have time to explore and, and to think about. And that would fundamentally change, right, the way and the design that we think about some of these things. And I think in some small ways, we're seeing some schools that are moving that direction, right, with AI doing the content provision and people now who are guides, who are helping kids to work on projects, to follow their, where they want to go. Some of that, right, is beginning to happen and to get some notice, which I think is a good thing.
Wow, that's so interesting. My wife and I are actually on a thing right now where we're trying to reduce eating highly processed foods. But figuring out what highly processed means is a whole rabbit hole learning journey. Right. And you got to whip out your phone at, whole paycheck or whatever. And you have to start figuring out what are all the ingredients here. And then you start to learn, it's actually pretty crazy. So, okay. So staying with engagement for a second, Carole, if you had a free afternoon tomorrow to fully engage, would we find you diving into a mystery novel, catching up on a history of rock and 500 songs or something else entirely? Like, what would that choice be?
Okay, it would be a lot of choices because my attention span is like only so long. But it's, it is funny. Like I do find myself out walking and, listening to a podcast. I'm trying to stay away from all the political podcasts right now.
Yeah.
But, I have to say, I took up knitting not very long ago. It's probably, and now it's almost a couple of years. And so that's been interesting to me. And every project I do is about how do I learn the next thing. Like, okay, I knit a scarf, done. But then there's just there's so much to learn. And so, that's been fun. I do read a lot of mysteries just for fun. I like, reading books sometimes without citations. But that also, keeps my mind going. I do a lot of puzzles. I'm a jigsaw. I love these these wooden jigsaw puzzles. So, there's lots of things, right, that I want to do. I'm also a birder. So I love I would prefer to be outside more than inside. That doesn't work all the time living in Arizona when it's 110 degrees. But so I do have some eclectic interests, as people would say, there's sort of the, what do they call them? The grandma interests or something like that. Like you're reading books and knitting and things like that. But but some of these things I've been doing I've been birding since I was in my 20s.
Right.
So,
yeah,
but it just is things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just always curious to do things, to learn new things.
Yeah, the image in my mind is sort of dancing over the top. It's almost like the little dot that dances over the closed caption, that you're kind of moving from one thing to another, but gaining something each time that you do that.
Yeah. It's a little bit different, right? I'll never just do one thing. I'm a birder, but I'm certainly not as serious as some of the people who are out there.
Yeah.
I'm not keeping track of everything, but I love getting out. I love paying attention. I, do all that, know what I'm looking at.
That's awesome.
And also then looking at plants and animals and insects and all kinds of other things too.
Back in the day when people on Instagram were posting what they ate for breakfast, which I tried to stay away from as much as possible, I realized that the platform could actually help me do an art project that I was never encouraged to do when I was in high school. And I had actually had an accident on my bike and had broken both my wrists. Somebody pulled in front of me and I went flying. And so I was grounded for quite a long time, but I could walk. So I would go for these really, really long walks. And with my iPhone, I started to really look for things that felt artistic to me, a building, a plant, or whatever, and ended up building this giant art project that really represents how I see the world.
That's great.
And, that's variance right there.
Yeah. There's another good book, though, Josh, called On Looking. And it's about a woman who takes walks, right, with different people around her neighborhood in New York. And it's everything from her 2-year-old to her dog to a lithographer to an environmental biologist. It goes on about there's 12 different chapters. And every one of them, she notices different things depending on who she's with. And again, it comes back to this idea of teams because you have to be observant and you have to notice things, but other people, right, help you to notice things in a different way.
Right. Wow, that's super interesting. One of my favorite podcasts, Carole, is called On Being. And that one was that was also one I started listening to when I was grounded off my bike and realizing that really shaped my thinking, even in terms of looking back on my teaching career. It helped me to realize that what I was doing in my history classrooms was helping kids become historians. I was not filling them up with history knowledge. And the process of becoming, I wonder what you think about that. Like in terms of the teaching in teams and that whole dynamic and all of that, does that help teachers, educators, and students more easily move through the process or understand the process of becoming something? You're becoming a chemist, you're becoming a biologist, you're becoming a historian, or a critical thinker, whatever it is that you're becoming,
I hope so. I just hope so. I also think it shifts the way, right, educators think about themselves because now they have to think about space, right? So they become architects, right? They have to think like an architect thinks. They have to think, differently about how to think about logistics, right? All kinds of things, right, that also start to shift who they are and what they need to think about. And it's more than just what they've been taught in a teacher prep program, right, in terms of instruction and curriculum and things like that.
Right.
But this pushes on them to have to think very differently about who they are too.
Right.
But I've always thought like that was whatever, kids ought to be mathematicians, they ought to be, wherever they're immersed in the moment, to give them that feeling. And again, it gets back to then that helps them see possibilities, which helps them to see opportunity. So
Right. Okay, before we get to the last question, one quick sort of follow-up. Here it is, September of 2025. What are next steps for you in terms of Arizona State, the College of Education, next education workforce? What's on the horizon, the near horizon for you?
Well, we're going to build something that we're going to call ASU Learning Design and Discovery. And that is taking this idea of next education workforce, thinking about, how do people work in teams, but it's also a lot of other things that we have also started, paths we've also started to move down to bring all these different ideas together. So Center on Reinventing Public Education that does a lot of work around policy and practice. Our Center for Whole Child is focused on the science of learning and development, because I think you can't even get to what we hope around the science of learning and development and integrating that into learning environments unless you've changed the structure of schooling. A number of different things. This AI possibilities work that Ron is doing, looking at media literacy. So there are a whole host of things, and then also including all of the models, all the learning environments we are building through ASU Prep, and all the kind of different models that they are building. They're building a Levitt Lab High School. So those become models for all of this, so that ASU becomes like a really big go-to for new thinking, for thinking about possibilities and opportunities, right, around education. And so that's our really big idea, is really taking everything now that we are building, all the ideas that we have for education, and pulling all that together to create something bigger than all of them. Wow. So that there's a synergy happening. And so that's really what's next for us.
Wow.
It's a big deal.
I'm a huge fan of REI, the outdoor store.
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit like you're dreaming and scheming about ASU as an REI for models of thinking in education.
Yeah.
And that folks can come and see what they look and sound and feel like and have a chance to engage with them and pull them off the shelf, if you will, and sort of let's see how we can apply it in Michigan or in Washington or Alabama or wherever, right?
Just trying to give people a vision.
Yeah.
You got to give people a vision.
Yeah. Wow. And how exciting to be in the middle of actually creating that. All of the folks who are on your staff, the folks who are part of your faculty and all of that, to be a part of that. Oof, boy.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
It's all good. So it's exciting.
Yeah, good. So Carole, I typically end episodes by giving guests the opportunity to shout out to someone upon whose shoulders they stand. That person who mentored, coached, guided, sponsored, and lifted them up. And you shared with me that you had what you call a, quote, cooperating teacher in Philadelphia who had a profound impact on the way you think about education, about learning, about kids. So who is or who was this giant? And what from that relationship do you carry in your proverbial backpack each day?
Well, so I dabbled in education for a minute, right? Did student teaching in inner city Philadelphia and just learned a lot. I was the only white person in this school, very urban school in inner city Philadelphia, had teaching first grade and had this woman who just really understood how to help kids believe in themselves. And she understood, right, that every one of them was different. Every one of them had different ideas. Every one of them thought differently. Every one of them was going to learn differently. That they all came from this sort of background that she needed to build, this sort of idea that they had to be able to not only believe in themselves, but believe that where they came from was important and that they could sit on the shoulders of others, right, and continue to move forward. It was just all of that belief, I think, and watching her presence in a classroom and all of those things that I always just think back to in terms of how I approach education, how I've always approached my own, my students, how I approach my teaching, and just how I think about, where we need to go in this field.
And how much you value variance.
And how much, yes.
Yeah. It really reminds me, Carole, of a book I read about a year and a half ago called Street Data. It actually led me to a recent guest, Jennifer Ahn, who's the executive director of an org in the Bay Area called Lead by Learning. But that whole notion of street data is really, it sounds like this is what you're talking about, is that you really have to gather up everything that you can possibly gather up about the kids that you've got in front of you.
Yeah. And the community and their parents and their, where they're coming from. And you have to know it all because it's not about just valuing it. It's about building for it.
Yeah. But it shouldn't be a burden to know it all. It's actually what for me, it's what it puts fuel in my tank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that process.
No, it's liberating.
Very liberating. Absolutely.
It's liberating.
Agree. Yeah. That's great. So, Carole, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. This is a very special moment, listeners, because we're going to release this episode in a couple of days. And in fact, What School Could Be is coming out with a new documentary film called Multiple Choice. And one of the very first places that we're going to be screening it is, in fact, in Carole's neighborhood in Mesa with a lot of the partners that she's been working with. So thank you for that. Thank you for the coordination on that. We're super excited. I'm going to be coming to your neck of the woods, so we'll get a chance to meet in person. So this has been a great conversation. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Josh. Very excited.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by education change agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.